Welcome back to Keepers of Our Republic, a weekly nonpartisan podcast talking to election officials and judges about defending the rule of law and free and fair elections, also known as How We Keep Our Republic. I'm your host, Tate Fall. If this is your first time joining us, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and join us here every week on Thursdays for these conversations. Today, I'm joined by the Grande Dame of Georgia elections, Deidre Holden. Deidre has been the director of elections in Paulding County for over 28 years, and she is a linchpin in the relationship between Georgia election officials and our legislators here, and she continuously advocates for the needs of election officials. She is a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so excited for our conversation today. Thank you, Deidre, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this.
Awesome. Well, we're going to jump in. Tell our listeners about yourself and how you got into elections. And I'd also love for you to share with them the why you stay. I think we talk about how we get started, but I'd love to hear too, why do you stay? Why do you keep working in elections after all these years?
So I think I got bit by the election bug when I was very young. One of my dear friends, we went all the way through school together. His mom was running for an office, and I think I was probably 14, 15 years old. And she asked me to hold a sign. And then I saw all the excitement around elections. So I worked for the county for 30 years. And when I was probably 5 or 6 years into my career with the county, I got asked to step in and run elections for the director because she had been diagnosed with cancer. So I said, absolutely. And once I got into it, at that time, it was a board of registrars and an election superintendent. And the election superintendent was ready to get out of the election business. And she asked me if I would be willing to step up and take it. So I was appointed the first election supervisor in Paulding County, and my title has since changed. But I love it. I love it. I love serving the voters. I have a servant's heart. And, you ask why. There's more good in this than there is bad. And one thing that always has stuck out to me is that when I was very new into this business, it was the last day of early voting, and it was like the first or second year we had done early voting, and everybody was after the coveted "I'm a Georgia voter" sticker, and that was the year we ran out. And we were in a very tiny office then, and there was this soldier that was there, and he was the last
Mm,
voter for that day. And there was this young lady, and she was very disappointed that we didn't have any stickers to give out. And that soldier, without hesitation, he ripped his American flag off the side of his uniform and gave it to her.
wow.
And that just showed me right there that America is still the best country in this world. And there's just voting is important. And, that soldier was there on leave. He's fighting to keep these freedoms and had no problem with saying, "Here, young lady, here's a sticker you can have." And I'm sure wherever she is, she still has that.
Wow. Now I have chills. What a beautiful story. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So tell us a little bit about Paulding County. How many voters do you have? Number of precincts, staff members, and anything unique about Paulding?
So we have 140,000 voters. I have a full time staff of 5, that includes myself. We have 20 election day polling locations, and we have 6 early voting locations. So we opened the additional 5 locations at the last week of early voting, but the main hub is here at our office at the Watson Government Complex.
Awesome. I've known you since I first came to Georgia, and one of the things I've heard you preach about since I first met you is the importance of the voters keeping their registrations up to date, checking their information before they head out to vote. Can you share with our listeners why this is so important?
Well, first of all, it's important because when you go to vote, we want to make sure that your experience is a good one, that your information is up to date. It never fails every election. We have people that think they've moved their registration and they're still registered in a neighboring county, or they're still registered in the state that they moved here from. So it's so important that voters, I would say at the first of the year, check and make sure your registration's up to date. because we don't want you to have issues. We don't want you to have to, go back to the previous county you came from. We want you to be able to cast your vote here, do it successfully, and have no issues. So in Paulding, we kind of go above and beyond because we get lots of return mail because people are constantly moving. So if we get a good address on the yellow sticker from the postal service, we have a postcard I created. It's called Have You Moved? And we send those throughout this nation, and it's unbelievable the response we get. People saying, "Oh yeah, I've moved to Florida. I've moved to New York." So that way we can keep our voter rolls clean, and only people that's on those rolls are the ones that's eligible to vote.
I love it. And I think it's so important too because every state is so different. And that's something I've talked to our other guests about because our listeners are all over the country. And so if you move from a state like Virginia, like I did, we had same day voter registration. So you could go on election day and register and vote for the first time. But in most states, that's not the case. So it's so important when you move, whether within the state or to a new state, that you update your registration right away because not every state has those types of opportunities. So I think
Yes.
that's great for our listeners to know.
Yes.
Another thing, you recently put out an amazing PSA. I think I watched it 4 or 5 times as soon as I saw it online. I was just like, again, I have to watch it again. And it was really focused on voter turnout, but in local elections, vote local. So can you share with our listeners kind of about that PSA? How did it come about? And what was your goal in putting that out?
So we have massive turnouts for a presidential election. And when it comes to our local primaries, you don't have a great turnout. So we had like a 74% turnout in the 2024 presidential election. And then in the May primary, 17.5%.
Mm,
So basically, if you break that down, 8 out of 10 are voting for president, but only 2 out of 10 are voting for your local elections. And what people need to understand, presidential and congressional elections are so important, but it's your local elections. That's the people who are adjusting your property taxes, who are educating our children, our grandchildren, who are making those decisions in our everyday life. And it is so important that our voters participate in that. And that's what I wanted to drive home to them is that all elections are important, but these locals are just as important as those federal and state elections.
I love that. I could not agree with you more. I think, when I done in my previous roles a lot of education with high schoolers, and I would tell them, your parents are the ones who vote for your school board members. So if you don't like X, Y, and Z about your school, they're the ones that change it. And guess what? When you turn 18 or when you reach a certain age, you can run for that school board position. And I think it's, like you said, they're the ones that are touching our everyday lives in a way that I think we just overlook. And that's why I
Yeah.
think it's not just a Paulding or a Georgia issue. Our whole country is that way, where our
Yeah.
local elections are small and we want to see that turnout. So I'm excited about your PSA. I hope to see that it
Yes.
helps you guys in Paulding and everyone because it's a great
I,
model.
I do too. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're very proud of that.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And that leads me to think about how election officials, especially here in Georgia, are constantly battling mis and disinformation. So tell me, what's your advice to voters as they're constantly consuming information related to elections and voting?
So that's a big issue with me is that the misinformation, the disinformation, it is so important. If you want the correct information, reach out to your local election office. We are the ones, we are the keepers of all of this information, and we try to get that out. But somebody can just start the smallest rumor on social media, and everybody believes it. So it's an everyday job trying to keep those fires put out, but my biggest advice to anyone is call your local election office, get the facts, and then go back out to your friends and family who's spreading this disinformation and give them the right information.
That's right. I love it. And I think, you know, obviously at the local level, you're busy people, but like you said earlier, you show up for your voters. And so you want to pick up that phone and answer those questions for them. It's not a burden, it's not too much work. That's our job. And so I think it's so important that our voters familiarize themselves with who their local election officials are and know that they can reach out to them because that, like you said, they're the ones that are keeping all that information, and that's crucial.
Absolutely, yes.
And as I mentioned earlier, you're such an important key player in the relationship here in Georgia between election officials and the legislature. And I know every state is different, every state has their own Deidre. But tell our listeners about how you built those relationships with our legislators and why continuing those relationships and continuing that advocacy is crucial for voter success.
So I started early on. I've always been very involved under the Gold Dome. I have legislators, not just from Georgia, not from Paulding County, that call on me, but I have some from other counties, which that means a lot to me. That you know they have to see your face to know that you're serious about this. You
Yeah.
care about what happens to our voters and the decisions that are being made. And I try to explain to them when they call on me, look, I do this every day. You're not doing this every day. You need to listen. If you don't listen to me, listen to another election director because we're all pretty passionate about the same things. And I think it's so important from the governor's office, Secretary of State's office, all of the General Assembly members that they see us, that they know we are there to help you. We know what we are doing. Please listen to us. I've recently made the statement that, the people that are writing the laws and making the rules, if you were to sit down and interview them and say, what's your experience in election? They're probably not going to have any. And they're going to say, well, I was a candidate on a ballot or I was an elected official. That
Yeah.
does not make you an election expert. So I think it's important that they see us, that they see people from our association there under the Gold Dome, and that they listen to us because we know what our voters need. We know what will work and what will not work.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. And I've seen just over the past few years in Georgia, those relationships and the building of those relationships that it really has paid off. And now, because the Georgia Association of Voter Election Registration Officials, that Gavrio, the Georgia Association, because they've put in so much time, now legislators are recognizing Gavrio. They're invited to hearings, they're invited to provide expert testimony, but it took a long time to get there. And, just because they testify doesn't mean they always listen, but it's
Right.
on the record. You're there, your voters know that you guys are showing up. And that is so crucial in the
Yes.
everyday changing world of the legislature, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So, final question. You've seen a lot of changes in our country and especially in Georgia in your time in elections. So, as we think forward to this year, our country turning 250, what are your thoughts on our democracy as it stands today? And what do you want voters to know?
Well, I want the voters to know that we do live in the greatest nation in this world, that we do have freedoms that others don't have, and we should never, ever take that for granted. Um, Lives have been lost for us to be able to go into that voting booth and cast our vote. 250 years. I'm going to date myself. I remember when we celebrated in 1976, so that tells you how old I am. But it's voting should bring people together. Yes, we can agree to disagree. We don't all have to support the same candidate, but we should come together as a community. We should come together as a state, as a nation, and really think about the importance of casting that vote. That's what our nation is founded on. Um, you know, I just think that so many times in the election world that politics gets involved,
Mm.
and it shouldn't be that way. Leave the politics for the campaigning, leave them out of the election process. But I think it's important for our voters to know that every opportunity you get, you need to be going to the polls. You need to be engaging with your election office. You need to become a poll worker. You need to say, hey, I'd like to serve on the election board because no one knows what it's like on this side of it until they've walked it.
Mhm.
And just to know that for 250 years, we've had this wonderful democracy and it's still wonderful that you can be a part of that. You can be, when I think about an individual voting, They are putting their vote in my hands. They are trusting me with that. And it's my job to see it through the entire way, to make sure that their vote counts, that it's taken care of, because it's very serious. But I'm excited about 250 years. Our nation has a lot to be proud of. And I just, for if nothing else, let that 250 years encourage you to get out and vote.
Love it. I couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the things I always tell people, when they ask what I do and I'd say I work in election, they'd say, "Oh, you're in politics." I'd say, "Oh, no, no, I'm not in politics. I'm in administration. I administer tests and I grade them and that's it. And then I post the results. That's all I do." So I totally agree with you more. And I hope that that's something that our listeners will be able to understand, that we're not in it for, red or blue or purple or green or whatever color you are, that it is because we show up for the voters, and I love that, and it's clear that that's why you care so much, and I love that.
It's
Well, thank you for joining me today and for sharing your insights with our listeners, and thank you listeners for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another episode talking with more keepers of our republic.
If you like this episode, please share it on social media and tell your friends. It's the best way for folks to find out about us. I hope you'll agree that our guest is indeed a keeper of the Republic. If you want to learn more about how you can help keep our Republic, stop on over to our website, keepourrepublic.org. Thanks so much for joining us to learn more about the safeguards in running our nation's elections.